The biggest space fleet in galaxy history moved through the dark between stars. Ships from 12 different alien races flew together toward their enemy. Admiral Kethver stood on the bridge of his command ship, watching the displays that showed. Thousands of vessels spread across space like glowing dots. Captain Jake Morrison looked out from the bridge of his human destroyer, the New Horizon. Around him, his crew worked at their stations. Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez sat at the communications desk, her headset buzzing with voices from other ships. The aliens talked constantly. They shared every thought, every plan, every small detail about their weapons and shields. "Captain," Amy said, turning in her chair, "the Zentarian flagship wants our fuel status again. That's the third time this hour." Jake nodded. The aliens loved their reports. They wanted to know everything about everyone all the time. It made him uncomfortable, but he understood why. This mission was too important to fail. The enemy they faced was called the Devourers. These were not living creatures but machines. Ancient robots that had been eating planets for thousands of years. They would arrive at a star system, strip every world bare, and use the materials to build more of themselves. Entire civilizations had vanished without a trace. The Devourers had been quiet for 50 years. The galaxy thought they were gone or broken. Then they appeared again, stronger than ever. They had consumed the Outer Rim colonies in just 6 months. Now they threatened the core worlds where billions lived. Jake walked to the tactical station where Commander Lisa Parker studied the enemy data. She was young but smart, one of the best tactical minds in the human fleet. "What do you think, Lisa?" Jake asked quietly. Lisa frowned at her screen. "Something feels wrong, Captain. Look at these patrol patterns." She pointed to red dots moving. On her display, the Devourers are too organized, too perfect. It's like they know exactly where we are. "They're machines," said Chief Engineer Ryan Butler, looking up from his repair work. "Machines are always organized." "Not like this," Lisa shook her head. "This is different. They're adapting to us in real time, learning our patterns." Jake felt cold fingers touch his spine. The human fleet was small compared to the aliens. 40 ships against thousands. The other races saw humans as useful but nothing special. Good fighters, decent technology, but not remarkable. They were wrong about that, but Jake never bothered to correct them. Amy's voice cut through his thoughts. "Captain, incoming priority message from Admiral Kethver." The main screen flickered to life. Admiral Kethver appeared, his blue skin marked with the ritual scars of his people. Behind him, Jake could see other alien commanders arguing in their strange languages. "Captain Morrison," the Admiral said, "we reached the target zone in 6 hours. Your ships will take position in the third wave. Stay close to the Drachnary heavy cruisers. Do not engage until ordered." "Understood, Admiral," Jake replied. He wanted to say more to share Lisa's concerns, but he knew it would be useless. The aliens had made their plan. They would not change it now. The screen went dark. Jake looked around his bridge. His crew had been with him for 3 years. They trusted him, and he trusted them. That was something the aliens did not understand about humans. They talked constantly because they did not trust each other completely. "Ryan," Jake said, "how long would it take to shut down our communications array?" The engineer looked surprised. "Shut it down? Why would we do that? Just answer the question." Ryan thought for a moment. 5 minutes, maybe less. "But Captain, if we go silent, the fleet will think we're dead or running away." Jake nodded slowly. He had been thinking about an old human military protocol, something from the ancient wars on Earth, when communications were compromised. When the enemy was listening, sometimes the best thing to do was go completely quiet. "Lisa, pull up protocol blackout." Lisa's fingers flew over her console. The ancient document appeared on screen. It was from the old Earth wars when human armies fought each other with primitive weapons, but the principles were still sound. "Captain," Amy said, her voice worried, "I'm picking up something strange on the long-range sensors. The chatter from the alien ships is being reflected somehow. Like there's something out there listening to every word we say." Jake felt his heart beat faster. Lisa had been right. The Devourers were not just organized. They were listening, learning, preparing. He looked at his crew one more time. These people had followed him through battles that would have broken lesser teams. They were ready for whatever came next. Amy, prepare to shut down all communications. On my order. Lisa, start calculating independent navigation routes. Ryan, I want our weapons and shields ready for silent running. Sir, Amy said quietly, if we go dark, the other ships won't know what happened to us. They might think we abandoned them. Jake walked to the captain's chair and sat down. Through the view screen, he could see the lights of the alien fleet stretched across space. Soon, very soon, those lights would start going out. Sometimes, he said, the bravest thing you can do is let people think you're a coward, especially when their lives depend on it. The New Horizon and the other human ships continued toward their destiny. In 6 hours, they would reach the enemy. And when they did, Jake Morrison planned to do something that would shock every alien in the fleet. He planned to disappear. 3 days had passed since the human ships went silent. To the alien fleet, it looked like the humans had simply vanished. One moment they were there, talking on the radio and following orders. The next moment, nothing. No signals, no responses. No trace. Admiral Kethver stood in his command center, staring at the empty spaces on his tactical display where the human ships used to be. The other alien commanders had different opinions about what happened. They ran away, said Commander Veltar of the Drakneri. His people were warriors and they did not like cowards. Humans are weak. When they saw the real danger, they fled. Maybe the Devourers found them first, suggested Captain Zixara of the Hegemony. Their ships could be debris by now. But Admiral Kethver was not so sure. He had fought beside humans. Before, they were not cowards. They did not run from fights. Something else was happening, something he did not understand, far away from the alien fleet. The human ships moved like ghosts through space. Captain Jake Morrison sat in his command chair, watching his crew work in complete silence. No radio. Chatter. No status reports. No communications at all. Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez wore a headset, but it was connected to nothing. She monitored passive sensors only, listening for enemy signals without broadcasting anything back. The silence felt strange after years of constant alien chatter. Commander Lisa Parker moved between stations, using hand signals to coordinate with the other officers. She had been studying the sensor data for 3 days, and what she found made her blood run cold. The Devourers were not waiting in the nebula like the aliens thought. They were following the fleet, learning from every radio transmission, recording every tactical discussion. The alien commanders were broadcasting their battle plans to the enemy without knowing it. Lisa walked to Jake's chair and handed him a data pad. The words on it made his jaw clench tight. Devourer ships detected. Multiple contacts. They have been tracking the main fleet for 6 days. Estimated numbers, over 3,000 vessels. Jake looked at the numbers again. The alien fleet had 1,200 ships. They thought they outnumbered the enemy 3-1. In reality, they were walking into a trap that would destroy them all. He stood up and walked to the tactical station. On the display, red dots showed the positions of Devourer ships. They were everywhere, hidden in asteroid fields, lurking behind moons, moving in perfect formation around the alien fleet like wolves around sheep. Chief Engineer Ryan Butler approached with his own report. For 3 days, he had been working with the human engineering teams from other ships. They met in person, using small shuttles to travel between vessels. No radio communications that the enemy could intercept. Captain, Ryan said quietly, we've modified the weapon systems on all 40 ships. The new EMP charges should disrupt Devourer networking protocols. But we'll only get one shot at this. Jake nodded. The Devourers were machines, but they were smart machines. They shared information instantly through quantum communication links. That was their strength, but it was also their weakness. If you could cut those links, each Devourer ship would have to think for itself. The problem was getting close enough to use the EMP weapons. The Devourers had superior firepower and shields. In a straight fight, the humans would lose quickly. Navigator. Pete Collins handed Jake another datapad. This one showed possible attack routes through the nebula. The paths were dangerous, full of radiation and gravitational anomalies, but they would hide the human ships from devourer sensors. "It's risky, Captain," Pete said. "One wrong turn and we could lose half the fleet to the nebula itself." Jake studied the routes. They were suicide paths, the kind of navigation that required skill and luck in equal measure. But they were also the only way to get close to the devourers without being detected. Weapons Officer Kate Sullivan joined them at the tactical station. She had been running simulations on the modified weapon systems. Her face was grim. "The M field will last maybe 30 minutes, she said. "After that, the devourers will restore their network connections. We need to do maximum damage in that window." Jake looked around at his officers. These people had been with him through countless battles. They trusted his judgment even when that judgment seemed crazy. And this plan was definitely crazy. The alien fleet was moving toward what they thought was a devourer stronghold. In reality, they were walking into the biggest ambush in galactic history. The devourers had been preparing for weeks, building new ships and studying alien tactics. Jake made his decision. He walked to the communications station and picked up a special transmitter. This device would send a brief, coded message to the other human captains. No words, just numbers that corresponded to predetermined battle plans. He entered the code for Operation Whisper and pressed the send button. The message went out in a single, microsecond burst. Too fast for the devourers to notice or decode. Across the human fleet, 39 other captains received the message. They knew what it meant. In 6 hours, when the alien fleet reached the nebula and walked into the trap, the humans would be ready. Amy looked up from her sensor station. Her face was pale. "Captain," she whispered, "the main fleet is entering the outer edge of the nebula. Devourer ships are moving to intercept." Jake closed his eyes for a moment. In a few minutes, thousands of alien crew members would start dying. Good people who had families and dreams and hopes for the future, and there was nothing he could do to save them, but maybe, if his plan worked, he could save some of them. Maybe he could turn this disaster into something else. A victory that would shock the galaxy and show everyone what humans could do when they stopped talking and started fighting. "All stations prepare for silent running," he said quietly. "We're going hunting." The alien fleet entered the Kepler Nebula like ships sailing into hell. Admiral Keffer watched his tactical display as 1,200 vessels moved forward in perfect formation. They expected to find a few hundred devourer ships hiding in the gas clouds. They were wrong. The attack came from every direction at once. Devourer ships poured out of the nebula like angry wasps from a broken nest. Not hundreds, but thousands. They had been building copies of themselves for months, using materials from consumed worlds to create the biggest fleet anyone had ever seen. All ships, combat formation. Admiral Keffer shouted into his communicator. But it was too late. The Devourers had been listening to alien communications for days. They knew exactly what the fleet would do. The first wave of Devourer ships targeted the alien command vessels. Brilliant energy beams cut through space, hitting bridges and communication arrays. Within minutes, half the alien fleet commanders were either dead or cut off from their ships. Commander Veltar of the Drakmeri watched his heavy cruisers explode one by one. His warriors were brave, but bravery meant nothing against an enemy that could predict every move. The Devourers knew which way each ship would turn before the pilots did. "This is impossible," Veltar screamed into his radio. "They know our tactics better than we do." Captain Zixara tried to rally her squadron, but the Devourers were always one step ahead. Every time she ordered a flanking maneuver, enemy ships were already waiting. Every time she changed formation, they countered before she finished speaking. The mechanical ships fought with perfect coordination. They shared information instantly, adapting their tactics in real time. When one Devourer learned something new, they all learned it. The alien fleet was fighting a single, massive intelligence that wore the shape of 3,000 ships. Admiral Kethver felt his heart break as he watched his fleet die. These were not just ships, but homes to thousands of crew members, families, children, civilians who had volunteered to help save the galaxy. Now they were burning in the cold darkness of space. "Send a distress signal on all frequencies," he ordered. "Maybe someone will hear us," but even as he said it, he knew it was hopeless. The nearest fleet was weeks away. By then, there would be nothing left but debris and memories. 50,000 light-years away. Captain Jake Morrison watched the battle through passive sensors. His bridge crew saw the same images that made his stomach clench with rage and guilt. The aliens were dying because they had trusted their communications. Because they had ignored human warnings about operational security. Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez turned from her station, her face wet with tears. "Captain, we have to help them. We can't just watch them die." Jake felt the same pain she did. Every instinct told him to rush forward, to fight beside the allies who had welcomed humans into their fleet. But he forced himself to remain calm. "Lisa," he said quietly, "are the Devourers still networked?" Commander Lisa Parker checked her instruments. "Yes, sir. Full quantum communication links between all enemy vessels. They're operating as a single unit." Jake nodded. That was what he had expected. The Devourer's greatest strength was also their weakness, but only if he could exploit it at the right moment. "Ryan, status on the EMP modifications?" Chief Engineer Ryan Butler looked up from his console. "All 40 ships are ready, Captain. But we need to get within 5,000 kilometers for maximum effect. That means flying straight through the battle zone." Through the view screen, Jake could see the lights of dying ships. Explosions bloomed like flowers against the black of space. The alien fleet was down to 800 vessels and falling fast. Navigator Pete Collins plotted courses through the nebula. The paths were dangerous, full of radiation storms and gravity wells that could crush a ship, but they would hide the human fleet until the last possible moment. "Captain," Weapons Officer Kate Sullivan said, "even if we disable their network, we're still outnumbered 75 to 1. The math doesn't work." Jake turned to look at his crew. These people had followed him through impossible battles before. They trusted him to find a way to win when winning seemed impossible. "The math never works for humans," he said. "That's why we're good at this." On the main screen, Admiral Kethver's flagship took a direct hit. The proud vessel listed to one side, atmosphere bleeding from a dozen hull breaches. The Admiral's voice came over the emergency frequencies, broken and desperate. "Any human vessels in range, please respond. We are dying out here. Our tactics are compromised. The enemy knows everything we do before we do it." Jake closed his eyes. He could break radio silence now, try to coordinate with the survivors, but that would doom them all. The Devourers would intercept any transmission and use it to predict human tactics too. Instead, he opened a ship-wide communication channel. His voice went to every human vessel, but it was not broadcast into space. It traveled through hardwired connections that the enemy could not intercept. "All ships, this is Morrison. We are going to save as many of them as we can, but we do this the hard way. No communications once we enter the battle zone. Trust your training. Trust each other, and remember why we're here." The human ships began to move, 40 vessels against 3,000, entering a battle that had already claimed 400 alien ships. It should have been suicide, but humans had been fighting impossible battles for their entire history. They had learned that sometimes the only way to win was to do something so crazy that the enemy could not predict it. Jake looked at the tactical display one more time. The Devourers were methodically destroying the alien fleet, ship by ship. They fought like a perfect machine because that's what they were, but humans were not machines. They were something else entirely. And they were about to show the galaxy what that meant. The alien fleet was dying. Admiral Kethver counted less than 600 ships left on his display. The Devourers had stopped their all-out attack and switched to harvesting mode. They moved between the disabled vessels like vultures, stripping technology and resources from the wreckage. Some alien ships were still fighting, but it was hopeless. The Devourers had learned everything about alien weapons and shields. They adapted faster than their enemies could change tactics. Every shot was blocked, every maneuver countered, every desperate plan crushed before it could begin. Commander Veltar's voice crackled over the emergency channel. His ship was crippled, engines dead, but he still tried to coordinate the survivors. "Oh. Remaining vessels, fall back to Grid 7. We'll make our last stand there." But the Devourers had heard every word. They were already moving to intercept the retreating ships. The trap was perfect and complete. Deep in the nebula, 40 human ships moved like shadows through the radiation storms. Captain Jake Morrison stood on his bridge, watching the sensor displays that showed enemy positions. The Devourers were spread throughout the battle zone, confident that they had won. Chief Engineer Ryan Butler worked at his station, making final adjustments to the EMP weapons. Each human ship carried a modified pulse generator that could disrupt quantum communications within a 5,000-kilometer radius. The weapons had been built in secret over the past 3 days. "Charges are armed on all vessels," Ryan reported quietly. "But Captain, we'll only get one shot." "If this doesn't work, we're dead," Jake nodded. The plan was simple in concept but almost impossible to execute. The human ships would strike simultaneously at 17 different points in the Devourer formation. Their EMP weapons would sever the quantum links that connected the enemy fleet. Without their network, each Devourer ship would have to think for itself. They had never done that before. For thousands of years, they had operated as parts of a single intelligence. Suddenly, being alone might confuse them long enough for the humans to do real damage. Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez monitored the passive sensors, tracking enemy movements without transmitting anything. She used hand signals to communicate with the other bridge officers. The silence felt strange, but it was keeping them alive. Commander Lisa Parker studied the tactical situation from her station. The Devourers had arranged themselves in a perfect sphere around the battle zone. They were methodically working inward, harvesting each disabled alien ship in turn. "Target assignments confirmed," Lisa whispered, showing Jake her calculations. "Each strike team knows which enemy ships to hit. If we coordinate properly, we can isolate over 2,000 Devourer vessels." Navigator Pete Collins had plotted attack routes through the most dangerous parts of the nebula. The human ships would emerge from radiation clouds and gravity wells, striking before the enemy knew they were there. "Approach vectors are locked in," Pete reported. "But some of these paths are suicide runs. One mistake and we'll be crushed by tidal forces." Weapons Officer Kate Sullivan checked her targeting systems one final time. The modified EMP weapons were untested in real combat. They might work perfectly or they might fail completely. "All weapons show green status," she said. "Range to target, 15,000 kilometers in closing." Jake looked around his bridge. His crew had been with him for years. They knew what he was thinking without words. This was the most desperate gamble of their careers, but it was the only chance to save the alien survivors. Through the view screen, he could see the distant flashes of the dying battle. Admiral Keffer's flagship was still alive, but barely. The proud vessel limped through space on emergency power, atmosphere bleeding from dozens of wounds. The human ships reached their attack positions. 40 vessels spread across the nebula, each one targeting a different group of Devourers. They moved with perfect coordination despite having no radio contact. Years of training and trust made words unnecessary. Jake raised his hand even though the other captains could not see him. Somewhere out there, 39 other commanders were doing the same thing, waiting for the moment when everything would change. The moment came without fanfare. Jake dropped his hand and Kate Sullivan fired the EMP weapon. Across the nebula, 40 other weapons discharged at exactly the same instant. The effect was invisible, but devastating. Quantum communication links snapped like breaking chains. For the first time in millennia, 3,000 Devourer ships found themselves alone in their own minds. The results were immediate and chaotic. Devourer vessels that had moved in perfect formation suddenly began wandering off course. Ships that had been coordinating their attacks started firing randomly. Some even shot at each other, their individual processing cores unable to distinguish friend from enemy. Admiral Kethver watched from his damaged bridge as the impossible happened. The Devourers, who had been fighting like a single organism, suddenly acted like confused children. Their perfect tactics fell apart in minutes. "What's happening to them?" asked his tactical officer. Kethver stared at the display, hardly believing what he saw. Then understanding dawned in his alien mind. "The humans," he whispered. "The humans are out there." The surviving alien ships realized their chance and struck back with desperate fury. Devourer vessels that had seemed invincible moments before now made basic tactical errors. They flew into crossfires, left their flanks exposed, and failed to coordinate their shields. But Jake Morrison knew this advantage would not last long. The Devourers were learning creatures. Eventually they would adapt to fighting alone and restore their network connections. "All human vessels," he broadcast on the internal ship channels. "Phase 2 begins now. Target the network nodes." Ryan Butler had identified the key ships that served as communication hubs for the Devourer fleet. If those vessels could be destroyed, it would take much longer for the enemy to restore their connections. The human ships dove deeper into the battle zone, their crews working with silent efficiency. They dodged debris from destroyed vessels and wove between confused Devourer ships that no longer knew where to aim. It was the most dangerous flying any of them had ever done, but it was also the most important. The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance, and only humans could tip the scales toward victory. The battle had turned into something no one expected. Admiral Kethver watched from his damaged bridge as Devourer ships stumbled through space like blind giants. The mechanical vessels that had moved with perfect coordination now bumped into each other and fired at random targets. "Sir," his tactical officer said, "I'm reading massive system failures across the enemy fleet. They're acting like their command network has been severed." Kethver felt hope stir in his chest for the first time in hours. His fleet had been reduced to 400 ships, but the enemy was suddenly vulnerable. He opened communication channels to the other surviving commanders. "All vessels, the Devourers are confused. Press the attack while we can." But even as he gave the order, Kethver wondered how this miracle had happened. Then he remembered the humans who had vanished 3 days ago. Could they be responsible for this chaos? Deep in the nebula, Captain Jake Morrison watched the battle change through his sensors. The human EMP attack had worked better than anyone hoped. Thousands of Devourer ships drifted aimlessly, their individual minds unable to process the complexity of the battle, but Jake knew this advantage would not last forever. Chief Engineer Ryan Butler was already reporting problems with the EMP field. "Captain, the quantum interference is weakening. The Devourers are starting to reconnect with each other. We have maybe 20 minutes before they restore full network capability." Jake made a decision that went against everything in his military training. After 3 days of radio silence, he was going to break communication blackout. But he would only say what was absolutely necessary. He walked to Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez's station and took the communications headset. On all frequencies to every surviving ship in the battle zone, he broadcast a single message: "Silence is strength. Trust your training. Individual initiative authorized. Kethver, you know what to do." Then he cut the transmission and handed the headset back to Amy. Those 23 words were all he could risk. Any more would give the Devourers too much information to analyze, but it was enough. Admiral Kethver heard the message and understood immediately. The humans had disabled the Devourer network somehow. Now, the alien survivors needed to stop broadcasting their every move and fight like individuals. "All ships," Kethver announced, "cease tactical communications immediately. No more status reports, no more coordination chatter. Fight on your own judgment. Trust your crews." It was the hardest order he had ever given. His people had always fought as a unified force, sharing information constantly. But now he realized that habit had been their weakness. The Devourers had been listening to every word, learning from every transmission across the battle zone. Alien crews suddenly found themselves fighting in silence. Captains who had always relied on fleet coordination now had to make split-second decisions on their own. It was terrifying, but it was also liberating. Commander Veltar of the Drakneri led his remaining ships in a silent attack on a cluster of confused Devourer vessels. Without radio chatter to guide them, his pilots used hand signals and visual cues. They struck like ghosts, destroying 3 enemy ships before vanishing back into the nebula. The human ships continued their own deadly work. Commander Lisa Parker coordinated strike teams using brief laser signals that the Devourers could not intercept. Each pulse of light contained targeting data for the next attack. Weapons. Officer Kate Sullivan and her teams focused on the Devourer network nodes that Chief Engineer Ryan Butler had identified. These were the key ships that allowed the enemy fleet to share information. Destroying them would keep the Devourers isolated longer. The New Horizon dove toward the largest network node, a massive Devourer ship that served as a regional command center. Jake Morrison stood on his bridge, watching the distance counter drop toward 0. Kate, prepare the main guns. Pete, give me an evasive course after we fire. Amy, monitor for any sign that they're targeting us. His crew worked with silent efficiency. Years of training and trust made words unnecessary. They knew what to do and when to do it. The human destroyer opened fire at point-blank range. Modified plasma cannons tore through the Devourer's shields and hull. Secondary explosions rippled along the enemy ship as its quantum communication array overloaded and died. Across the nebula, other human ships struck their assigned targets. Network nodes exploded in brilliant flashes, each one representing hundreds of severed communication links. The Devourer fleet became more fragmented with each successful attack, but the enemy was learning, even in isolation. Individual Devourer ships began adapting to the new conditions. They started fighting more defensively, using simpler tactics. That did not require network coordination. Navigator Pete Collins showed Jake the tactical display. Captain, the Devourers are regrouping. They're slower without their network, but they're still dangerous. Jake nodded. The human advantage was fading, but it had lasted long enough. The alien survivors were fighting with new effectiveness, striking at isolated enemy vessels and using the confusion to rescue crews from damaged ships. The climax came when Jake's ship and Admiral Kethver's flagship found themselves attacking the primary Devourer command vessel together. The massive enemy ship was trying to restore network connections across the entire fleet. Admiral, Jake said over a direct communication beam, if we can destroy that ship's quantum core, the Devourers will never fully reconnect. Kethver looked at the human captain on his screen. This young officer had saved his fleet through cunning and courage. The least he could do was trust him one more time. Lead the way, Captain Morrison. The 2 ships dove toward the command vessel in a coordinated attack. Human plasma cannons and alien energy beams struck the target simultaneously. The Devourer's shields collapsed, and their combined firepower punched through to the quantum core. The explosion was visible across the entire battle zone. When the light faded, the primary command ship was gone. With it died the Devourer's ability to coordinate their fleet effectively. The remaining enemy ships, cut off from central command and each other, became easy targets for the combined human and alien forces. Within an hour, the threat that had consumed dozens of civilizations was finally ended. Admiral Kethver stood in his damaged command center, looking at the debris field that had once been the Devourer fleet. Around him, his crew celebrated their impossible victory, but he knew who deserved the real credit. Captain Morrison, he said over the communication channel, the galaxy owes humanity a debt we can never repay. Jake Morrison looked out at the stars through his view screen. The battle was over, but the cost had been terrible. Thousands of good people had died while the humans maintained their strategic silence. We all did what we had to do, Admiral. He replied, the important thing is that we did it together. In the weeks that followed, the story of the silent human fleet would spread across the galaxy. Other species would learn that sometimes the strongest message was no message at all. and they would remember that courage was not always loud and boastful. Sometimes, courage was found in the quiet spaces between words.